Hi. Hola.
Hi, here's Mr. Dozy.
This is Michael Bradley.
Hey, I'm Memphis.
Hey.
Hola. Hello.
I'm here with soccer.com.
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 And I'm talking with my friends soccer.com.
See you soon.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed me messing around with the ball a little bit at the start of the video. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. But next I want to get into my overall opinions on the shoe, what my experience has been like with the Phantom 3DF, and discuss whether or not this is still a Hypervenom, because they've essentially changed everything in comparison to previous models. Before we get into that though, I just want to give a quick disclaimer, because I'm sure a lot of you guys have already pointed this out down below in the comments. I was wearing a firm ground shoe on artificial grass, something that many times before on this channel I have recommended not doing at all. If you regularly play on artificial grass, I would very strongly recommend getting an AG specific shoe and not wearing a firm ground model. Even though it is a very common thing to wear FG shoes on artificial grass, it's generally not the best thing to do in regards to the durability of the boot and also in regards to safety. Probably the most important thing, wearing firm ground stud patterns on AG surfaces generally results in a very clingy amount of traction, and having too much traction can actually result in pretty serious injuries to your ankles, knees, and even hips certain times. A more common issue that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize is a problem when wearing firm ground shoes on artificial grass. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances of where I live, it being winter time, all the fields that are outdoors, natural grass fields of course, are frozen, covered in snow, and closed for use. So I don't have access to a regular natural grass field, and being that there was a lot of demand for this particular model, and being that I did want to try out the new stud pattern and the new sole plate of the firm ground model, because it will ultimately be the most popular version, I decided to make this playtest video on artificial grass. Again, something that I had to do due to the circumstances of my particular situation, but something that I personally do not recommend doing. If you regularly play on artificial grass, they do make an AG version of this shoe, and that is what I would recommend buying. If you play on natural grass, the FG version will do you just fine. Now, what I'm about to cover in this review is more so based around my personal experience with the Phantom 3 DF. If you're not overly familiar with all the tech specs and features on this particular model, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen to my overview video of the shoe where I go over every single technical aspect of the Phantom 3 DF. That's going to give you a lot more information, a lot more insight on what I'm actually talking about and referring to in this particular video. So if you're not familiar with this model, be sure to check that video out. And with that being said, let's continue on to the review. Starting off with the one aspect of the Phantom 3 DF that perhaps impressed me the most, it's the out-of-the-box comfort, especially in comparison to the original version of the Hypervenom Phantom 2. The first mid-cut Hypervenom, it was very stiff, it was uncomfortable depending on what your personal preferences were. I didn't find it to be the most comfortable thing in the world, and it's part of the reason why they did ultimately end up changing the upper halfway through the run of the Phantom 2. With that being said, I really think that the Phantom 3 DF is more comfortable than both the first and second generation Phantom 2, both in regards to the upper as well as the mid-cut aspect of this particular shoe. The Flyknit upper, which is entirely different than what we've seen before from the Hypervenom line, is super soft, very flexible. It truly does have that sock-like level of comfort on your foot. It moves very nicely. There's not a lot of internal reinforcement, so you're getting a more straight-up knitted feel to the upper without a lack of reinforcement, which we'll get to in just a second. The change in the sole plate, which is a lot more flexible this time around, also plays a part in just the shoe feeling more natural on your feet, especially out of the box. It doesn't have a sensation of stiffness that you really got from the previous generation Hypervenom Phantom 2s. And then the mid-cut aspect, the heel area, something that was fairly uncomfortable out of the box from the Phantom 2, and I guess the first generation of mid-cut models from Nike, be it the Superfly 4, the Obra 1, or the Phantom 2. This reminds me a lot more of the new Nike Magista Obra 2, where the fit has been tweaked in such a way where it feels a lot more normal and a lot more comfortable out of the box. In regards to the collar, this being the DF version of the Phantom 3, there is a low-cut model as well that I'll be getting in for review very shortly. They have tweaked the collar where it's 10 millimeters higher on the medial side versus the lateral side. Is this something that's noticeable at all when you're playing? No, it has no impact on comfort, and really the collar itself has no impact on performance. The only benefit that you're going to find is that if you are wearing them on artificial grass, having a little bit of a higher kind of cut to the shoe and having an enclosure that wraps tightly around your ankle or leg, you're going to find that those little rubber pellets that are in the artificial grass surface don't get into the shoe quite as easily. So that would be the one benefit of a mid-cut collar. But other than that, like I said, there's no ankle support, there's no benefit to having this. It's pretty much just an extension piece that, because of its design, does impact the fit in the heel a little bit. But like I said, the tweaks that they've made makes this a much more comfortable experience in general. In regards to fit and sizing, the shoe does have a similar type of shape to previous Hypervenom models, where it's not quite as tight-fitting as the Mercurial line, but also not quite as wide as what you'll get from the Magistas. It's kind of something that's a little bit in between. The shoe does have a tighter fit overall, but I guess the predetermined width is a lot wider than what you'll get from something like a Mercurial Superfly or a Mercurial Vapor. So overall, tighter fitting shoe, not really narrow though. I think they will fit most people. And I just like the overall fit of the shoe in general. It seems to fit me particularly quite well. And in regards to sizing, they haven't changed a thing in comparison to previous Hypervenom generations. They run 100% true to size. I wore my usual size 9 US for review, and the fit and the length was absolutely perfect. To put things as simply as possible, the Flyknit upper on the new Phantom 3 really doesn't compare to previous generation Hypervenoms, and in comparison to other current Flyknit models from Nike, be it the Superfly 5 or the Obra 2, this feels quite a bit different as well. And I think that really does speak to the innovation that Flyknit technology has been in the soccer world. It's come such a long way since its initial introduction in the form of the Obra 2, and I would go as far as to say that this is the most complex Flyknit upper that we've ever seen on a boot from Nike. The end result, though, is something that does actually perform quite well. The upper itself, in regards to just general thickness, is kind of in between what you're going to find from the Obra 2 and the Superfly. And it's not to say that all three of those shoes have different thicknesses of Flyknit. It's just the way that they implemented that Flyknit technology that creates for a different feel. The thinnest sensation is going to come from the Superfly. The more padded, dampened sensation is going to come from the Obra, whereas the Phantom 3 kind of sits in between those two models in regards to how thick it actually feels on your foot. It's not necessarily thicker than the Superfly, but it will have a slightly more padded sensation, if that makes any sense. And that has to do with the 3D texturing you're going to find across the entire upper. Again, you're going to find a 3D texturing element on the Obra 2, but that's a much more heavy texturing that makes for a more dampened sensation. This is, like I said, more low profile and therefore less significant in terms of how much dampening on the ball you're actually getting. Also, something that's a first with this particular shoe is the pour-on foam inserts located in the main striking area on the upper. Those pour-on foam inserts are 2 millimeters in thickness, so very, very thin. And for those that don't know, it's a rate-dependent foam, meaning that softer impacts are going to mean that the foam is going to react more softly, and harder impacts means the foam is going to firm up and have more of a pingy sensation. And that's pretty much exactly what you get from this particular shoe. You really don't notice the pour-on foam when shooting the ball. It doesn't have a dampened sensation. It doesn't cushion the impact in any way. I know a lot of people automatically wanted to compare this to the AccuFoam padding on something like an Evo Power. This doesn't feel like that at all. Really, all the foam is doing here when shooting is kind of taking the edge off of what would normally be a much thinner upper. It still has that pingy responsive sensation. It doesn't feel like it's absorbing any energy when you make contact with the ball, but it's not leaving you kind of feeling completely barefoot, where if you've ever shot a ball with something like a Mercurial Vapor, for example, with a very thin upper, if you do that for an hour straight, you're gonna have a little bit of, I guess, not necessarily pain, but you're gonna feel where you've been hitting the ball repeatedly on your foot because of that lack of padding. This just takes that edge off, if that makes any sense, but doesn't take away from any of the energy transfer. Where you really notice the foam, though, is when you're doing softer things like passing and juggling especially. That's where you notice a little bit of extra softness from that pour-on foam. So it does have that little bit of duality to it, which is how they marketed the shoe and what I found the end result to be to a certain extent. It's not a super noticeable thing. It's a very subtle difference. And the amount of padding that you get when juggling or passing or receiving a ball is extremely subtle, like I said. But it still is noticeable if you're paying attention. And it's an interesting technology to introduce on what is already a very complex upper in the form of this Flyknit variation. Other standard features that you're going to find from Nike Flyknit materials stay true as well. You get the Nike skin covering that remains pretty much the same general finish as what you'll find from other Flyknit models, so it's not particularly grippy on the ball. And then ACC all conditions control remains as a feature as well, but not really a make or break thing in my opinion. The other controversial aspect of the upper is the exposed Flywire cables, which the lacing system is directly attached to. Now, a lot of people are concerned about these kind of tearing out or catching on other people's cleats. I would say that the holes themselves are pretty small, so it's really unlikely that someone's cleat is going to get caught in there. If you left it completely exposed with no laces, that's definitely a possibility, but while the laces are tied, it's kind of pushed down pretty close to the upper, so I don't necessarily see that being too big of a concern. In regards to just general durability from tying the laces, this is not the first time Nike has used this kind of a lacing system on a shoe. It's the first time for a soccer cleat, but they've used this plenty of times on basketball shoes, running shoes. So this is not entirely a first thing for Nike in regards to attaching Flywire cables directly to the lacing system. With that being said, I really find that when you tie the laces tight, the Flywire cables are very, very effective in terms of keeping your foot locked in place, allowing for a much more responsive shoe than I was honestly expecting, just because of how soft and flexible this upper is. There's not a lot of internal reinforcement, but those Flywire cables, when you pull the laces tight, really do a fantastic job of holding your foot, locking it in place, and really, like I said, just creating a nice responsive sensation. Is this as responsive as the original Hypervenom Phantom 2? Probably not, but it's also much more comfortable, a lot softer feeling, and I just think a better experience in general. If you want a more rigid, responsive sensation, maybe that Phantom 2 is for you, but there's a reason why they ended up changing that upper halfway through its run. It just wasn't all that comfortable. This blends responsiveness, comfort, and general natural flexibility with your foot all in one, and I think the end result is something that performs extremely well, offers a really good touch, and it's just a joy to wear in general. My experience with this shoe has been very positive in regards to this new Flyknit upper. Other notable features worth talking about with the Phantom 3 is the Nike Grip insole, which in all honesty, if I didn't know it was a Nike Grip insole, I would have just assumed it was a regular insole because it doesn't feel different to me in comparison to other regular mesh liner insoles that we've had from Nike in the past. So for me, the Nike Grip insole, not really a big deal here. Didn't have any issues with slippage on the inside of the boot, but I don't necessarily attribute that or credit that to the insole itself. I just think the shoe fits extremely well. So having a non-slip insole, while it's great, I didn't really feel like it affected the overall performance of the shoe in any significant way. The sole plate itself, something I talked about earlier in the video, I really like. It's more flexible than what we got from previous generation Hypervenoms, which just makes for a much more comfortable, natural sensation when moving around in this shoe, which I definitely do appreciate. And in regards to the stud pattern, this is of course the firm ground version, which is a complete redesign. You get these kind of hexagon, almost conical shaped studs on the medial side, and then the mercurial bladed studs on the lateral side. The reasoning for this is to kind of have, again, that middle ground between the mercurials and the magistas, where you get the aggressive traction of the mercurial on the lateral side, and then more of a freedom to twist and pivot on the medial side, with a stud pattern that's more along the lines of what you'll get from the Tiempos and Magistas, more conical style studs, if you will. Again, they worked extremely well on artificial grass, even though most firm ground stud patterns do, but I didn't really foresee any issues in regards to traction here. It felt very stable. You do have more studs underfoot than what we got from previous generation Hypervenom, so pressure is more evenly distributed across the bottom of the sole plate, which I think is always a good thing. And again, it felt very, very stable, even though the artificial grass playing surface I was using it on was a little bit more shallow than I would have liked it to be, given the length of the studs. But overall, I think it's a nice improvement and just a good change in general from previous Hypervenom stud patterns, even though the previous one was quite good as well. This is just something that's a little bit different, and I would say performs equally as well, just has slightly different performance characteristics. The last aspect of this shoe worth talking about is the weight, and it's a little bit surprising to me. In a size 9 US, these things weigh in at 6.9 ounces, and given the construction of this shoe, and comparing it to the previous generation Hypervenom Phantom 2, be it the first or second version, it doesn't feel like they've skimped out on materials. This doesn't feel thin or flimsy in comparison to the previous generation, but somehow it's over half an ounce lighter, and it now falls into pretty much the exact same weight range as the Mercurial Superfly 5. So if you are interested in the Superfly because of how light it is, you now have an alternate option in the form of the Phantom 3 DF that's going to be equally as light, but is going to offer a very different experience in regards to fit, feel, and general performance characteristics. Alright guys, so that is it for my playtest review of the Nike Hypervenom Phantom 3 DF. Overall, I've been very, very impressed with this. It is a complete redesign in comparison to previous generation Hypervenoms, and as Nike often does with these new models, they truly did think of everything, and the end result is a product that, while entirely all new, feels very refined, feels very well thought out, and ultimately performs extremely well. So overall, I definitely can recommend the Hypervenom Phantom 3 DF. I'm very excited to try out the low-cut Phantom 3 as well. Expect videos on those very, very shortly. But if you must have a mid-cut model from Nike, I think that this is a very, very good option, even in comparison to the Obra 2 and the Superfly 5. They're all pretty solid shoes. It's just a matter of what type of fit, feel, and general experience that you're looking for. With that in mind, if you guys do have any questions in regards to this particular shoe, leave them down below in the comments and I definitely will get an answer out to you. If you're perhaps interested in a pair of these for yourself, there'll be a little pop-up on screen as well as a link down below in the description. That'll take you to the review page on my website where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes. We'll be able to pick these guys up below their normal $300 retail price. So be sure to go ahead and check that out. If you enjoyed today's video, found it helpful and informative, be sure to support it with a like. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all of my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. And as always, thanks for watching.